here with my partner in crime here, Vikas, Deora. Let me do a little introduction. Let's introduce ourselves briefly to the audience. Jose Rojas. I'm a PM in the Identity Division. I'm currently part of the Identity Platform team. And for quite some time, I have been working in the platform for Azure Active Directory B2C. And it's through that work that I interact very, very frequently with Vikas, and he'll introduce himself from the security team. In the last 9 months that we know we have been living through an exceptional time, and I hope that you are all of you here listening have not been affected. We have seen an incredible rise in the consumption and both in the adoption of Azure Active Directory, and especially Azure Active Directory B2C. It seems like a vast number of digital transformation projects that were perhaps on a slow burn or a normal burn got all of a sudden put into high gear. And it is in that context that we had been working on, and we're happy that just prior to this, we were able to bring into the market in a number of previews, a number of features that have for some time have been available in Azure Active Directory for our corporate brethren, in which I hope many of you use within your own organizations. But with the help of Vikas and others in his team, we are able to bring them forward to Azure Active Directory B2C. I hope that today we're able to give you a brief intro on what the capabilities are and why they're important, but then go into a walkthrough of the capabilities and then show you a demo. And we hope that'll trigger some questions from this audience. These features we're going to discuss are all very well documented at docs.microsoft.com. And the customer situations we're going to describe are also documented at customers.microsoft.com. Vikas, would you like to also introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jose. Vikas Deora. I'm part of the product group for Conditional Access. My job is to make sure that all identities are protected, be your employees, your partners, and now your customers, your consumer apps. So that's my role in Microsoft, to make sure we take protecting identity seriously and doing our best to get the features out to you so you can secure all identities.
Great.
Thanks, Jose.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you. Okay, let's jump right in. We're going to try to address questions that you put in the chat as we go along. If not, we will. I personally follow with each one of your questions directly if we're able to address them during the call. Let's jump right in. We'd like to first talk about the landscape of protecting your application and consumers' identities. We'll get briefly through this because we want to get to the demo stuff. So a couple things. First of all, we think that it is absolutely critical to protect yourself against attacks. These are proactive attacks. We encounter this all the time, and you gain the benefit of us having been at the receiving end of this for Microsoft as well, for really hundreds of thousands of customer tenants. More recently, password spray has become particularly habitual, and the team has done a ton of effort to improve our resiliency, our ability to react to that, and we'll talk about that a little bit briefly. And then when it comes to DDoS on Microsoft itself, we've been able to, for quite some time, be able to protect ourselves from it, and we hope that through our other Azure capabilities, not the ones we're going to discuss in this call, we can also help your applications. Then there's the need to identify and mitigate risk. We're going to show you today briefly some of the reports that you can go in and look at on your tenants today, assuming you are with B2C, and you're able to identify what risks might already be out there that we're able to detect and we can tell you about, so you can take some measures. There's no doubt that if you are of any size, you will have some of this happening in your network. And we hope that this helps you, but we know we're only part of a bigger answer, which is where all the risks that are applying to your applications. We hope this at least triggers those conversations. And quickly on the side of mitigating risk, we'll also talk about that today, because it's very much about what to do when this happens and what policies can you apply that are both customer friendly and effective against the attacks. In your organizations, the awareness that many of you will have the onus to raise and increase, you'll be able to access secure reports and auditing of the actions related to those reports. Now, auditing, we will not address that today, but it is really through the reporting of actively reporting, and you can even create your own internal reports and triggers so that your organization knows that everything's fine or everything is not. And then there's also in many cases, kind of the always on kind of security layers that you ought to at least consider, if not for your own or for your specific application all the time, perhaps in particular activities within your application where you want to protect as a matter of course, right? And this becomes now not just protecting against overt attackers, but against protecting against anybody else accessing your user's computer. Sometimes some of that is necessary for some specific privileged actions. But you can combine an MFA layer together with a mitigation layer, and that we will show you shortly. And lastly, you are with Azure Active Directory, if not, you should, because the ability to give you high availability and being globally available from customers worldwide, especially these times where I'm sure many of you who have online identities or online commerce are receiving visits from all over the world, being able to do this with a global company like Microsoft would put you in good stead. This is the landscape of what you want to do, and we'll discuss to several of these during the call. Lastly, to get this done effectively, the automation of the reports, and then the automation of the work itself, so you're able to deploy the policies we're going to discuss, deploy them at the same time as you deploy your own application builds, is something that is quite possible, and many customers have done. So they're able to take these policies that we're going to discuss through their own kind of development, build, test, and then production cycles, right? And do this in an automated way. So it becomes a habitual part of how you deploy your own services and how you test them. So with that, let's just talk about a couple customer stories. Harsh Corporation's it's a long-time customer of Azure Active Directory. And again, this information is at customers.microsoft.com. We mention them because they have been enjoying Azure Active Directory identity protection for quite some time, and both to monitor and to secure their identities. Now they have now considering how this can also help them on the consumer side, but it's to the corporate side that they've been getting the most value out of it. And the ability to consolidate all their controls through one place, which is something that you should all be considering, and something that sometimes is not that typical on the consumer side, right? To have all the controls and all the entry points through one place is something that's much more common in corporate than in consumer. But we also would encourage you to do that in this Azure Active Directory that can help you achieve that, right? All the way down to detecting sign-ins and any suspicious activity from any entry point to your organization. So Harsh Corporation, the article will tell you more about how they've achieved that. Vikas?
For British Petroleum, they had an interesting scenario where they really want to protect security for all the users, and 80,000 of them with MFA, but they wanted to do it in the most seamless fashion. So they're not interrupting the users with MFA constantly, always on. So one of the things they did was they focused highly on the risk-based policies, and they rolled out successfully MFA based on risk. So instead of triggering MFA all the time, those MFA were only triggered when the risk signals were of certain level. So that was something which we saw a great rollout with British Petroleum, and it shows the kind of the seamless experience you get when you combine risk assessments while enabling your security posture.
Great, thank you, Vikas. So a bit of a reminder, right? And this is something that many of you are probably aware of in this call, but when you communicate to other parts of the organization, it's something to keep in mind, right? So we were coming from a world where every user was an employee, and now we're on our way to a world that every user, and this is particularly interesting, it's not just an employee, but also partners and customers and bots, of course. Right. So the idea that we need we know you're faced with the challenge of expanding your login options, and also you have to be ever more careful with how strict you are, or what do you do to mitigate your risk. And this is a little bit of what B2C provides, the controls we're going to share with you, which is to apply the security, but to apply it when it's needed, right? Rather than a blanket, everybody must MFA. We now enter a territory. Well, if you do that, you might be in risking of inconveniencing customers. And sometimes when it comes to partners, there are some environments where some things simply don't fit. Number two, we know that applications have to work from everywhere, and not only your applications in the consumer side, but when a user logs into your application and then has to access other applications within yours, they can come from anywhere. right? And that's where the third point about composite apps, right? The apps are based on reaching and doing authentication across multiple domain boundaries. And we know you have to figure this out and work this. And this is something we think about in AD all the time. And lastly, especially in the consumer case, it's always been the case that customers can come from everywhere, right? Not only can they come from everywhere, but after as they use your service, you want to redirect them to a partner service and direct them anywhere else. So we know you live in this world where there's very few things you can trust. So the establishment of every session requires you to evaluate the risk of each one of those sessions, right? So in this context, we have 3 things that we'd like to advise you to do and do all the time, right? So number 1 is the need to explicitly verify all identities, right? With some form of MFA. Now, you don't have to do this all the time, but certainly any time that a user comes in for the first time you see a particular browser, this is something you ought to do. And especially when users go to access some of your privileged sections, which could be areas like changing credit card number, accessing addresses, accessing sensitive information where you want to explicitly verify the identities. We have the case of a customer, a major retailer in the United States, that implemented this in a way that only under certain portions of their e-commerce website is the MFA required. And as we'll show you, that can be done in a different number of ways. So it doesn't always have to be at the first entry point, but it does require those of you who develop apps to be a bit more thoughtful as to which portions of the experience really require MFA. And this is how you do this without damaging the consumer experience. B2C Assistance today supports phone-based MFA, and that's text or voice. We do support email verification in lieu of MFA, right? We know it's not as strong as truly using a different device, but in consumer situations, it's quite effective in doing an additional check on the user and getting the benefit of the security, the additional security of email providers like Outlook.com, Live.com, or really Gmail, right? And then also B2C allows the ability to use third-party services, right? This can be done in advanced configuration, but third-party services like Twilio, who also do MFA or who have Authy as an authenticator application, is also possible. We're often asked about when will we have authenticator support in B2C, and this has been something that we continue to have high on our list. We just have not quite gotten to it, but we'll continue to carry over into the next calendar year, and we hope to be able to achieve it, right? Now, if there's any doubt in anybody's mind, right, the simple step of adding an MFA, especially when you need it, it's incredibly successful in preventing, in stopping identity attacks, right? We still see organizations who do not use MFA, and the difference is dramatic, right? So you don't have to have something extremely advanced, just that additional obstacle keeps a lot of the bad guys out. So that's step number 1, explicitly verify all identity with MFA. I'm just adding the point that do it when you need to in your consumer applications. Second point.
When you're enabling MFA, you have multiple choices. If you use conditional access, and we hope you use conditional access for enabling MFA, you get options to use signals to decide what triggers MFA. And one of the things which is very important is you think about this quite hard when you build your security posture. It's very easy to just enable MFA all the time, all the apps, all the users, but it also means that there is a kind of a balance between security and productivity. What we want to do is we want you to be secure and productive. So we want you to create a security posture which is not hindering your customers, you people who are going to use your consumer apps. So one of the best practices is to think about what those signals are. And one of the key signals which you can potentially use are risk-based. What risk-based signals does for you is you can say, if the sign-in risk is high, then require MFA. Or if the user risk is high, require password change. When you do something like sign-in risk is high, require MFA, the MFA is triggered only when you know that there's a issue, there's a problem. It's not happening all the time. When you know it's from the patterns, from the signal, it looks like this right user. I can't see the user has just traveled from New York to London in 5 minutes. Or with the user risk, you can see, I can see the passwords being advertised in the public internet. So I think there is an issue. There's a compromise of the passwords. And when the bad guys they come in, they either trigger the sign-in risk or the user risk. So you've captured the signals which are coming from the bad guys and preventing the bad guys going into the apps, while the good guys goes through with the right MFA prompt into the apps. So the idea with the conditions and controls with conditional access is to make sure that you have a seamless experience for your apps, making sure that your users are getting to the apps in a non-frictional way. And thinking about this identity protection, real-time risk to trigger your MFA and allow policies are going to be key to your success for achieving a huge rollout. And it will keep the bad guys off. From licensing perspective, it is a premium offering. Real-time risk comes under P2 licensing, while the other factors like users, locations, they come under P1. And the benefit you get with that is you get, kind of monitoring on the risk signals, you get detections of the risk signals, you can remediate those risk signals and create a custom workflows when these risk signals are triggered. So there's a lot of benefit, there's a lot of goodness of capturing the signals, knowing these signals, and kind of maintaining your security posture around these signals. Jose is going to discuss about how do we actually measure some of these risks. But once you get the measurements with the conditional access policies, you can trigger the right controls, which are require MFA only when the risk signal is high. And that gives you an amazing seamless experience for your apps. So that's the slide. Just think of these conditions under which your controls needs to be triggered. So having these conditions and controls through conditional access policies allows you to manage your whole security posture for all your consumer apps, and not just app by app. You can build all your apps and just apply a conditional access policy, which will take care of your security posture for all your apps, all your consumer apps, on what they need to do when any of your consumers access your apps. So that was the kind of like the think about your conditions, think about the controls, and think about real-time risk when you're enabling conditional access policies. Jose, if you go for the next one.
Yeah. You bet.
So when you're enabling these policies, especially conditional access policies, you have a huge plethora of options. You can use the UI or you can use the APIs. We'll recommend using the APIs because you get the full automations. You can, as part of your app DevSecOps, you can build your apps. You can make sure that they light up with the right security posture from the day one as they go live. So go ahead and use conditional access, use risk-based policies, and use APIs to configure your policies to manage your DevSecOps journey. So that's this one. Jose, off to you.
Yep. Thank you, Vikas. So we'd like to show you a bit of the feature set before we show you on a live demo. So first of all, this all begins with the incredible capabilities of Microsoft of risk detection. These are now available to you via the detection of signing risk, that's real time, and by detection of user risk, which is an offline assessment of whether an account is currently compromised in any way. And one incredible reason why Microsoft can do this so well is because we do it consistently across a gigantic world of different applications and services, right? When you think about the 1.2 billion device scanned each month, when you think about our security being in 90% of enterprises today, our protection of over 1 billion Azure user accounts, which, as you can imagine, have to have for which we control very sensitive resources that you depend on. And even with all that we have, we still regularly identify, botnet networks, regularly identify networks that come up and come down at regular intervals, trying to hide themselves, and we're able to communicate whatever is learned across the network and to benefit your tenants. Now, even beyond that, as specific crimes are analyzed, there's feedback back into the system to identify patterns that ought to be detected going forward. So it's extremely robust system, an area that Microsoft continues to invest in a big way. So really today is about how do you get to leverage this into your own world. Now, we wanted to highlight one specific signal that the team had to do a ton of focus on, which is password spray, right? It's really amazing. Number one, first way to get password obviously is to get it from an end user, right? But beyond that, right, through phishing. But beyond that, I wanted to just share some numbers as to why this becomes such a concern, right? So we have as many as 9 million high-risk enterprise signing attempts flagged, 2 million compromised accounts detected. And by this, we mean accounts for which we actually could tell through information out of the dark web and through the analysis and actually through what happens after, right? They indeed they were compromised, and we're able to detect them, identify and flag those users as high risk, and in many cases just prevent the access. So this is happening across the world, and this is available to you. Now, let's talk about a couple of the risks that are identified and what signals are available for the reporting to you in the B2C context, right? So from a user risk perspective, this is again the offline detection. We have a generic name called Azure AD Threat Intelligence. And this is really about a collection of information out there that's brought in to evaluate whether a given user pattern, where they came from, what IP addresses they have been using, what apps they have been using, point to there being a particular higher user risk. We will be adding signals that we don't yet have today, and I want to point this out because even though we do have password spray protection, we do not have the ability to detect the pond type situation where Microsoft can do this on the enterprise side, but here's an area where we don't quite have parity yet. On the enterprise side, we can detect users and passwords that have been out in the wild, if you will, or available and compromised, pond, if you will. But on the consumer side, we don't yet have this capability. This is a very high priority work that the team expects to be able to do in the next 6 months. So password spray covered, but the compromised credentials not yet covered on B2C tenants. Now, when it comes to signing risk types, we prioritize this because we do have the situation that there's so much more, there's not as much history for user risk on the B2C side because users infrequently use their applications. But on the signing risk type, which is all about the starting of a new session, we do have an amazing amount of capability. And I'm just going to quickly mention a couple highlights here. And Vikas, please feel free to jump in as well, right? So a typical travel, which is, as it sounds, right, a user who performed a series of attempts a second sign-in from a place that could not possibly be reached unless something special is used like a VPN within a period of time, right? That travel would not have been possible. Anonymous IP, right, where we know when an IP address is associated with Tor networks or VPNs, and we're able to flag these. I wanna address a question that was said earlier, that the fact that it is detected does not mean that it will be rejected, right? It's merely a detection that points to an overall score that could then lead to a potential flagging of a user signing risk being high, medium, or low. So any single thing does not necessarily tip the user over, number one. And number two, it is still up to you to decide what to do with it, right? Don't think that this report automatically means a user would be affected. Malware-linked IP addresses, right? This is all about botnet IP sources. And I just want to highlight password spray, as I mentioned earlier, right? Which is a quite sophisticated method of attack, but the team has made a lot of progress in identifying that signal. Vikas, would you highlight any others here that you want to bring up or any experiences?
No, I think I wanted to just add to what you said, Jose, is that the signals are collected over a period of time. So you have, it's not just a single event. There are cases where there are single events, but for things like user risk, it's a collection of events which are slowly increasing your user risk. And those are adding up to triggering certain things. And generally, if you're a good guy, like if you're trying to get the things done, you would see you can pass through the controls. So if its user risk is very high, it means that your password is compromised. You change your password, you remediated your user risk. So the remediation happens, and then you go back to your zero user risk. So your user risk goes back as soon as you're remediated. So your good guys are still going in and accessing the service. after the remediation. So it doesn't block the good guys, it keeps the bad guys out.
I wanted to address a question here about a typical travel. The question was whether, hey, if a user habitually logs in from Poland and Denmark because of a VPN or just a habitual pipeline between the two locations. So that over time does not become a typical, right? A user could have more than one typical location, and the system can learn that, right? It's not by virtue of a single atypical travel situation that a user can become immediately high risk. It can become medium risk, however, I would say that. And in fact, when I'll show you the report, you will see a medium risk user due to a typical travel, right? So it becomes more of a flag, which can be confirmed if then something else happens that might together tip the signing to be high risk, high signing risk. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a feeling that you don't have to completely worry about that, but certainly this is something you'll be able to see in your reports. So moving on to the next, we wanted to, this slide is really all about kind of honestly just kind of telling you how hard this is and how proud we are that we've done it, right? We don't have to spend a ton of time on it, right? But this is one of the patterns that are as hard to detect as anything else because of the incredible amount of IP addresses and domains that you have to be observing to actually detect the pattern, because the attackers are able to go across so many different sites and so many different locations coming from different IP addresses. So the team, Vikas' team and security is particularly proud about this and the incredible impact that it has, because there's been as much as 38% of presence in different enterprises across our own network. Now, let's walk through a quick example and then and to make sure we land the concepts here. So identity protection, overall, it's the combination of detecting the risk and doing something about it, right? So we begin with any normal signing. This could be just logging into your e-commerce application. Immediately, the real-time detections are applied, and a score is attributed to that particular login. The score in this case assesses medium signing risk, and AD does not necessarily do anything. It's up to you to tell us what to do about that. In this case, through a policy that would say, hey, I want to MFA users that are medium signing risk. This goes back to the question that in a typical travel could trigger an MFA request if you want it so, giving you protection and giving you also the ability to get through it through an MFA, right? A CA policy informs the situation that an MFA should be occurring over a user, over a group of users, or over a group of users using specific applications that you want to protect, right? Let me just go back to the earlier e-commerce example. The web application that this particular e-commerce company used between the e-commerce portion of the site and the financial portion of the site actually reflected as two different client types and actually triggered different policies. So that's a way to do that. Number one. Number two, what I'm going to get to is that the signals that come out of a CA policy can be communicated back to your application. Not specifically the risk level, but the mitigation can be communicated back to your application, so your application can decide what to do about it. In this particular case, the decision is to require MFA to continue. If it's passed, we're good. If it's not passed, right, then this lets us know that a risk event might have happened and was prevented, right? Might have. Similarly, there are also offline detections when a user is not attempting to log in, right? That can trigger a risk event. Again, going back to the reporting, going back to the next login being affected. It is also quite possible too that while a user is offline, once the user risk has been elevated, that user is also flagged as now requiring a more complete sign-in the next time they come in, or requiring a password reset. Now, in terms of the risky users API, right, there is the ability to get programmatic access into all the reports. This does support a number of things. For example, the ability to pull in the information, the risk reports, and incorporate it with other signals that you have on your side in your application or in your own environment. And we know through e-commerce, and we know you have other signals you could use ours together with. And you can now do things like dismissing risky users, confirm users as compromised, because perhaps the combination of our signal and your signal confirms they're compromised, which means the next time they try to log in, there will be an action taken. Or you can confirm user compromise proactively via the API, right? Just kind of say, yeah, indeed, this user was compromised, and it kind of feeds back into the system. Get users risk history is also useful when you have customer support type situations that a customer might be calling, for example, your customer support requiring a password reset, and you would like to inform your customer support folks whether this particular user has had a history of some suspicious history, that might require your CSS to then ask more questions and be a little more careful about go ahead and go and resetting this account for this user. Now, the risk detections API not only does provide to access to, this is just the two methods that we provide to do this with, right? One, to get a list of the risk detection objects, and the other one to read the properties and relationships of the risk detection objects, right? The difference in being to one to just get all the users that have been affected, and the second one is all about getting the specific risk profile for each one of those users. And we think this can be, we hope this can be quite useful. Let me look through the questions here to see if there's any that we ought to address about this right now. Let's see, we have here, so we are able to assign risk triggers per user or per group of users. Can we scale different risk criteria, such as given our suite is attending a conference per user? Sorry, I'm being so quick. There's a question whether we're able to assign risk triggers per user or per group of users. And can we schedule different risk criteria, such as when our C-suite is attending a conference overseas to a specific city following a set travel route? I don't know that we could accomplish all those things in one policy. It is possible to identify a particular group of users as being a higher profile or a particularly more sensitive group of users, say, for example, their C-suite. It is also possible to create a CA policy for that suite of users that can be proactively more aggressive, or maybe it's the opposite, the proactively more permissive. It is also possible to have your CA policies triggered based on location. So in effect, you really could create what I think you're asking, following a set travel route. I think that might end up being a little more than you want to manage. But if you wanted to say on Tuesday only from this location, on Wednesday from only this location, and Thursday from this location, you'd have to write 3 policies on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, because you might want to add to that. Let me know if that sounds right to you. So the capability is there, not the capability to establish a set pattern, but it is the capability to, for example, approve a list of countries for which they will not be traveling over the next week. And only from those countries would you then, if they're not coming from those countries that you expect them to be, then require MFA or block a user. Vikas, anything else on that example or other examples?
Yeah, I mean, you could also use the name location APIs. So if you have an automation which you know the set path, you can add or remove them from your name location APIs. So they become part of the conditional access policies or not. So if you want to manage a set route or a set path to say, okay, these are the users, but I want to block them when they are coming from anywhere else except this country, then you can just make sure that you have CA policy, which is targeting your C-suite travel path as a name location. And then what you do is separately call the name location API and just manage what that country should be for that group of name locations. So you could do that, and there are various automation options which you can use with the APIs. But there is no a map where you can go in and just say this is the path and just these are the days, and you can, as long as you follow that path and the days. That's not available, but you can achieve the same thing using APIs and making sure you have your own automation to add and remove those name locations as the time flows.
There's another question here about risk detection that I think we'd like to address, just in the spirit of giving you fresh information that you care about. So we have Twitter ask about, do you recommend admins to look over each risky user or risky assigning, low, medium, high, and take an action that is confirm the user or dismiss it, or just let the user risk policy and signing risk policy do the auto remediation? Here's what I would say. We did not design the system so that a single person has to necessarily view the reports and proactively do something about them, right? We realize that in most environments, that is not something that any of you perhaps in the core are willing to go do or want to invest time doing. So the system isn't designed so that you create automated policies and you tweak them over time. You tune them to the right audiences, you tune them to the right situations, and that you don't have to worry about it. So I would recommend that you do not count on a human reviewing them on a daily basis. However, it would be appropriate that if there's a security team at the corporation who doesn't, or a risk assessment team in your organization, that they do on a habitual basis do review particularly high risk activity and kind of do the internal review as to say, did we expect this? Was it mitigated as we expected? Is there an incredible spike on it over some period of time that tells us something else is going wrong? More importantly, right, we're only talking about the signing portion. All right, all we can protect is your front door, right? What your users do when they're inside, it's something that you are uniquely able to do, right? Especially with your consumer applications. So in any meaningful consumer application, on the back end, you also have some audit and some tracking of what are the users doing and what activity seems a little odd, like changing shipping addresses too often, or it could be, changing credit cards too often. There's a number of systems that you already have that together can best give you the picture you're looking for. We're really concerned about the front door, and I think the automated way is the way that would be probably most effective, and that's the way we think we design it for you. Vikas, would you add to that?
Yeah, I think actually looking at it every day is not probably the right thing to do. You could go in and have a monthly audit or a weekly audit to see what your high risk users are, if you're interested. But one of the things to help with automations, which we have done, is we have integrated connectors for identity protection in Power Automate platform and Logic Apps. So if you want to build your custom policies or custom automations, you can use Power Automate, you can use Logic Apps if you're used to those. You can have a connectors which triggers based on, say, there's a high risk event or a medium risk event, and you can then decide what you want to do with those as well, which is, I get signals from, as Jose was saying, I'm getting signals from my app, and I can see there is a huge download, and I never see a huge download of data or a huge change of data. And I can combine that with my risk signals to make certain actions happen. And you can do those kind of things with the Logic Apps and Power Automate, because you get the signals triggered, you can then pull the signals from your app and then decide to take certain actions. So it'll be really good if you have a chance to look at the Power Automate connectors and the Logic App connectors for identity protection, and try and build and play with these automations of how do I combine these signals and automate them instead of having to go every day or every week to look at those in the Azure portal.
Great, Vikas. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. We really do think that we'd like to give you the information that you need to manage your security, but this automated fashion is really the way you want to do it. You'd rather be tweaking it over time than thinking that you'd rather tweak the policy based on the reports and the outcomes. Too many customer calls that are not happy, right? I hope that does not happen to you. But be watchful for that. You tweak it over time. And anytime you're deploying new properties, or you have a customer base growing in a particular set of countries, then your user base will change, and you will see changes on this as well. I address here also a question about to use low, medium, or high. Basically, from our team, you should always do something about a high signal. Medium, you should do something depending on what the user is accessing. And what I've gotten from the team is that low typically is not something you have to mitigate. It's probably more something to observe. But that's, your mileage may vary depending on your user base, like anything else. There's a fairly good amount of information on what we've discussed today, and a good beginning place is this URL here, Identity Protection and Conditional Access for Azure AD B2C. Just start there, because it'll guide you through the capabilities we've discussed today without giving you the full gamut of information that's available on enterprise, which is richer because there are more signals on the enterprise side. Great. So with that, I want to take you through a quick view of how this is working B2C. First, and we'll do this fairly quickly. First of all, B2C is very much of the end user experience, right? As I think you guys are as well, right? The idea of it being look and feel of the way you want it to be, and the ability of users to control their own information, right? But it all the more therefore requires that you are sensitive to risky sign-ins, because the signing can therefore affect an account and its information, right? So all of the branding and the look and feel of B2C is key for friction-free experience, right? The way we configure B2C, and this is just a super quick recap, right, is that for each application, you're able to build specific policies. And now we're going to use policy in two different words. One way to use policy is what is the experience the user goes through? How do they log in? What do they look and feel? What are the options for identity providers like Facebook, or do you accept Google, or do you accept an email, or do you accept the user ID? That's defined in a sign up and signing policy, and a single application can choose which one of these two to operate. This is important because this is the kind of capability that allows you to therefore change experiences depending on what a customer is trying to do. Your app can decide that there's one signing required for all users in all situations that does not have a CA policy, a conditional access policy. And it can also decide that when they access a certain portion of the site, the application is going to require a reauth, right? That will go back to B2C, and B2C will now check the current signing risk. And if something is required, then trigger it. I'm just giving you food for thought of things you can do with your applications, especially consumer applications. Let me walk you guys through a demo. I think this can be the best way to show you some of these capabilities. So let's start by looking at a report. So what I'm showing you in the screen right now within the Azure Active Directory B2C. This is the Azure Active Directory B2C menu on the far left, right? I made it big on purpose so it's a little clear for you to see. But what you can see here is that I'm looking at a month of history of detections. Remember, all of this is available via APIs, number one. Number two, for each user, right, I'm able to review what IP address they came from, nothing new there. The specific location, and you can see here a number of examples from across the world, from Holland, Netherlands, to, in this case, Puerto Rico. And in each one of these, there was a detection. There was a reason why I was added to the list. In this case, it was an unfamiliar signing properties, right? Which could be linked back to the browser I use, could be backlinked to the location I'm from, and just kind of call that something that usually doesn't happen here, right? Password spray we've talked about quite a bit in this conversation. You can tell that password spray immediately triggered a high risk signal, right? And then look at a number of anonymous IP addresses used. And I'll bet you, because it's the Netherlands, there's a good chance there's some VPNs being used here, and they were assessed as medium, right? This, as you look at this in your own population, you can better assess, do I want to take action on medium? Do I want to take action on low? Do you want to take action on high? I'll tell you right now, you should take action on high, but it's more of the question whether you fall in the action on medium or not. And it's through these reports that you're able to do that, right? I want to show you one more thing, which is the list of detection types. So this is the full list, and we earlier showed you the list of the ones that apply, and the team is adding new signals here all the time, just to make it more transparent to you, try to make it more transparent to you, what is it that's going on, and you can then do the research to see if this is not something normal with your particular user base. But I won't go into great detail here. Vikas, anything else you add on this page that we should call out?
No, I think you've covered well.
Okay, great. So now that you've seen that there's some activity you want to prevent, right? Because let's be clear, unless I wrote a policy, this high risk was nothing happened with it, right? We merely detected it, we flagged it, but if the user met the conditions you described, like provided MFA, they logged in correctly, they're still coming into your service. This is entirely on your control. So what to do about it? What we provide you with is the ability to do define a conditional access policy. Right. This is a conditional access panel, and this is a section that Vikas and his team own. Right. It's all about the creation of a new policy. And very quickly, I just want to point out a few things here. The creation of a new policy where you're able to identify, to which users this applies or groups, which specific applications should be protected, under what conditions. And if those conditions are met, let me just, for the sake of, I'll show you an example in a second. If those conditions are met, what is required? What must be provided by the user to let them in, right? So with that overview, let me just show you one example that I prepared earlier. I created a policy that would say MFA only users who self-selected to higher security. The scenario is that you have an application, maybe it's a financial application, they get to access trading information, and a number of users, by virtue of their net worth or by virtue of their own selection, they have decided that whenever somebody accesses my account, I want them to be MFA, right? I want to be MFA when I access my account to provide a higher security level, right? The way this is done is by assigning users to an Azure Active Directory group. Right? You can look that up how to do that, but I created an Azure Directory group. I assigned users to it. In this case, only 2 users for the purpose of the demo. And the policy reads like this. The specific users identified were the users belonging to this group, this AAD group called self-selected MFA required. So only these users will be bothered by this. Then I then selected which applications, and I specifically selected these 2 applications. We were talking to one of the top car manufacturers in the United States about this. So we simulated a car unlocking app and a car management service. So only those two applications will this policy apply to. And then we said the condition. The condition should be none, right? In other words, we always want this to happen for this particular set of users. We could have said only if they're high risk, only if they're medium risk. But when it's self-selected by the user, they typically want it to happen all the time. But this is something you can work out with your customers. And lastly, what grant, which is the simplest thing, which is to say, if this is true, should we block or should we grant access and require MFA, right? So with that in mind, I just want to take you quickly through what the B2C policy looks like. So in B2C is based on defining user flows. And won't go into detail, that's a subject of another conversation. But in the user flow, you get to define some properties, right? And I'll run it to show you what it looks like, right? So specifically, you're able to define a number of properties about how this experience will run. And it's in these properties that you are to define the behavior that you want. Won't go through all of it, but specifically in this experience, I'm defining that I want the MFA method to be email. Note that I could have chosen SMS, but I know that these customers have not provided all provided phone numbers in the past, so I'm going to use email as the MFA method, right? And the MFA enforcement, I'm going to make it happen only when the conditional access policy requires it, right? This is the default approach. Else, I could have said, no matter what the conditional access policy says, I always want an MFA. That's what this would have required. Okay. There are other settings to select, which I won't go over, but I want to show you what this experience looks like. So if I were to run the user flow, and let's go ahead and select the car management app we talked about in this demo, car unlocking app. And I just run the user flow. I'm just simulating the experience of your application calling B2C. It already preloaded my credentials because I had done this before, and I push sign in, right? Now it simulates B2C apps approving the login, and it sends the information back to your application. As you can tell here, there was nothing blocking me. Why? And I'll show you why. That was on purpose. But the token was sent to your application saying, yes, this user, Jose, he's allowed to come to your application. Here's information about this user. The reason it didn't trigger is because I have not turned on the policy, right? So I'm back on the conditional access screen. I'm going to turn on the policy. I'm going to save it. And by saving the policy, now it's active, right? So let's do that again. Let's go ahead and log in one more time. And run user flow is your application telling B2C, please log in a user. And I'm going to run that user flow, right? Same screen comes up. I'm accessing my application. I happen to be in this, that's called high security group, and I attempt to sign in. In this particular case, it says verification is necessary. Obviously, you can control everything on this page, so you can say whatever you like to say. I'm going to say, yep, send me a verification code. And I'm going to look for my email to see that I've received the verification code. And this becomes the second check, or the way in which B2C enforces a higher level of security using conditional access, right? This could have well have been, I got a code, the email with a code, and I'm going to put in my code 785270, 785270, verify the code, and it was all good and continue, right? So this is just a quick demo to show you how a policy triggered based on the fact that I'm part of a group, but exactly the same thing would have happened had I set up a signing risk condition of high, and we would have then gone through that. Great. So with that, let me stop here for a second. And Vikas, anything else you would add about what we just saw, or any particular one of the pages that you'd like me to focus on?
I was going to add that if you go back to the B2C, you could see the sign-ins and what happened with those sign-ins in your B2C tenants by going to the users and just picking a user from if you pick a user from B2C Blade.
Yes, so let's go do that. So if we go to, sorry, that's not the page. We go back here, B2C.
Users.
Yep.
Or you could just do sign-ins. So if you could do sign-ins.
Okay.
On the left.
Yep.
So if you have any, someone calling up and saying this is not working, that's not working, at least make sure that you can go to that user and the sign-in associated to that user. So you would be able to see all the sign-in associated to that user. You can see where the issues are. You can go to conditional access here There's a special tab for conditional access and report only. You'd be able to see if a conditional access policy was initiated for that sign-in and what was the result. Was it allowed, blocked? The other thing which I forgot to mention is that you can also enable report-only mode for conditional access policy, which means you can check the impact of the policy over a period of time before you enable it on. And this is the place where you can go in and see the report-only associated to those sign-ins as well. So you will see report-only sign-ins, and you'll see the policies which are impacted while those sign-ins are happening. So do try, when you're enabling the policy, enable them in report-only first to see the impact of the policy before you turn them on, and go to the users and see the user sign-ins to see how the policies are getting evaluated for those sign-ins. So look at the conditional access tabs inside the sign-in and also the report-only tab inside the sign-ins.
Great, Vikas, thank you. Well, we hope this session has been useful. I know we raced there to the end, but we definitely wanted to show you this live after the conversation we had with you. And I'll be happy to stay online and answer a few more of these questions here.
Thank you so much, Jose and Vikas. I appreciate you being here. And thank you everyone else for joining us today. If you guys can take a couple of minutes to provide your feedback about this call, and if you have any suggestions for topics that we will want to cover in future calls, that will be great. So our next call will be on January 21st. So that's the third Thursday of January at the same time, 9 o'clock Seattle time. And also, we will be posting the recording in the YouTube channel, right? So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We appreciate having you here.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe out there, and happy holidays.
Thanks, everyone.